Begin Self-Publishing, episode number 106. They Ask, You Answer for Fiction with Marcus Sheridan.
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
On this episode, I talked to Marcus Sheridan, who is a former swimming pool salesperson who suddenly learned in the days when his business was suffering in the recession that by creating absolutely amazing blog focused about the questions that people have about swimming pools, he managed to pull his company back from the point of oblivion just by doing blogging and answering questions. He's now known as the Sales Lion and goes around training people internationally on how to do content marketing, especially focusing on answering the questions that the customers actually have. She goes through in his book, They Ask, You Answer. He's also an expert on video. But I'm going to be talking to him today solely about how to do blogging for fiction marketing, because that's the great thing that everybody says you can't do content marketing for fiction books. So now over to the interview. Hello, Marcus. Welcome to the show.
Tim, it's a pleasure to be here. I think we're going to have a great conversation today, buddy.
Okay. What would you say to people who say that you can't use content marketing to market fiction books?
Well, I would question first if they really understand what content marketing is. And if they get it, then I think they're going to nod their head and say, oh, I'm starting to see the possibilities, because you got to look at it like this, right? You take an author of a fictional book. Sometimes much of what we're selling has nothing to do with the story, the words on the page. It's what's behind the words on the page. And one of the things that we like to teach our clients when we go into a business is we always say that if we don't show it, whatever it is, it doesn't exist. And so what does that mean? Well, okay, so let's look at it in simple terms. As you already know, I own a swimming pool company. And so we manufacture swimming pools. And that's one of the things that I do. But we show the detail of the manufacturing process better than literally anybody in the world, Tim. And because of that, we've built significant momentum when it comes to the way people see our pools and they trust us in a different way. How many authors show their manufacturing process, the way they go about their work, the way they create their story? How many are working to build their brand outside of just the words they put inside of that book? Because as we were discussing before the show, the difficulty today is this. Most publishers, and I mean, I know as well as anybody, they don't market your stuff worth jack. That's not what they do. And so unless you have a tribe before you publish that book, it's very difficult for it to catch fire. And unless you continue with that tribe afterwards, it's difficult to continue the momentum. And so I think that's just a few examples of how, yes, content marketing certainly applies.
Okay. I listened to the audio book of it, your book, They Ask, You Answer. Why is it important to answer the questions that you say at the bottom of the funnel in your content?
Well, so everybody's bottom of the funnel is different, but the bottom of the funnel is what serious people, serious buyers want to know about your stuff, right? And so let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, right? And I'm just going to use a pool, and then I'll use a book as an example. I'll just kind of go back and forth that way, just so it's easy. So if somebody knows they want a fiberglass pool, right? They might say things like, how much does a fiberglass pool cost? Or is a concrete pool better than a fiberglass pool? Or these are like, there's so many, what are the problems with a fiberglass pool? Who is a fiberglass pool not a good fit for, right? So these are the things that people ask, real buyers want to know. And so when it comes to your books, it's important, oftentimes we like to say who our stuff, what it is and why it's great. But we don't talk about what it's not for, right? And so by saying what it's not for, who it's not necessarily written for, it sounds odd when you think about it, but once you really understand this principle of psychology and persuasion, when you tell somebody who your service or product is not for, it becomes dramatically more attractive to those that it is for. And that's just one simple example. Another one is, let's say somebody is looking for specific types of books on a specific type of subject. Is it possible that you use content marketing to address those questions so that when they are learning about that particular thing, that you inject yourself into the conversation? Let me give you, again, a pool and book example. And so with respect to swimming pools, one of the things that people used to ask me all the time was, hey, Marcus, I'm not going to hold you to it, but let's say that, we don't get this pool from you. We think we will, but if we don't get this pool from you, is there anybody else that you might recommend? Well, for a long time, I heard that question, and it's a common question because people ask you because they trust you enough to ask you. You never love hearing that question because it means they're still looking. But one time I wrote an article, who are the best pool builders in Richmond, Virginia. Now that's a major area of ours, Richmond area, where we install pools. And I wrote that article, and because of the amount of people that search for best pool builders, Richmond, Virginia, every year, that article averages somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 a year in revenue for the company. So how does that apply in this case to, let's say, a fictional author? So there's all these different types of fictional books and categories and subcategories and things that people are looking for, types of stories that we're looking for. And so consider all the best-based questions people are asking with respect to books. Like, what are the best books for? What are the best fictional novels that discuss X, Y, or Z, whatever that subject is? That's the type of conversation you should own. You should own it through text, and you should own it through video. And this is an example of bottom of the funnel based questions that people are searching.
So it's almost like those questions that people have just at the end of their buying journey. So they may be looking at your book and another book or something along those lines, or even they're just thinking about a few books and then they happen to stumble across your comparison of all the books in your genre. It's that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Like you could do a review of the 5 best XYZ books for 2017. I mean, that's a really, really strong article right there that potentially could have a lot of legs, especially if you are targeting a specific niche. And specificity is key here. You don't want to be generic. In other words, you don't want to just write an article that says the 5 best fictional books or novels or whatever of 2017. You want to be specific. And if you're specific, like, the 5 best fantasy, and you can choose a particular type of fantasy, right? If that's your genre. By doing this, now all of a sudden you have a chance to inject yourself in a conversation that you may not have been involved in before. And, Tim, this is just one simple example. I think it's actually more important, though, outside of that we physically show through the power of video, our writing process, our ideation, the entire, how many authors do a visual representation of the timeline of their book? In other words, from the time that they came up with an idea to the outline, to maybe the proposal, to the process of negotiating the proposal, to the process of getting a contract, to the process of producing your first chapters, to getting your advance, whatever that thing is, that's very interesting. And so if you can build momentum yourself around the process of the work that you put into this book, well, then people are going to pay attention. And that is a form of content marketing.
Okay. I'm going to skip the next question. I was going to ask you about reviews because I think we've kind of covered that. But I think in your book, you mentioned there's sort of big 5 types of questions that you ask. Could you go over what those are again?
Well, in pretty much any industry, and, whether you're looking to buy a service, to buy a product, it really doesn't matter. When we are researching something, we want to know 5 things before we contact the company, let's say, or before we walk into the store. We want to know the money question, essentially, how much is it? We want to know what are the negatives or the problems with it? What are the issues with it? What are the drawbacks of it? Okay, those are all kind of lumped in the same area. We want to know how it compares to other things that are similar to it. So, for example, let's say in my case, I was looking to buy a business book. There's been many times when I was comparing business books, trying to figure out which was the best fit for me. we want to know what people have said about it, in other words, reviews, and we want to know what is the best it, so the best of, and just think of all the best-based questions that you have researched before or have asked before as you've researched something online. So again, it's cost, it's problems, it's comparisons or / versus, it's reviews, and it's best. Those are the big five, and that essentially is what dictates the economy in terms of the way that people buy, the way they make decisions.
To paraphrase a little bit from your book, I think this is based on the idea that obviously people now have got so much more information before they even think about buying something, because they do a lot more research than in the good old days where people just wandered into a car showroom and then spent a lot of money.
I mean, the fact is, many of us have had experience where we walk in to buy something and we can immediately tell that we are actually more informed than the salesperson is.
Yeah.
And, that's not uncommon. It's because we have the capability now, we have the power to vet. And if we want to, we can vet extremely well.
Okay. Coming back to, obviously, we're talking about content marketing in general, but what is the best form of content for answering these questions? Should people be using video, podcasts, the written word? Do you have a preference and people should be using all of these kinds of content?
Yeah, I mean, Tim, you know how it is. I mean, I think we should try to use all. I think in terms of the journey that is your book, I think you need to show that. There's no question in my mind. I think you should show that process and help people develop a deeper relationship with your struggles, with your triumphs during that journey. In terms of asking the specific or answering these specific questions with respect to books in your genre and all the searches that people are making online with respect to books in your genre, then I would probably focus textually on that. And ultimately, it's a mix, right? It's a mix. I mean, because we don't want to try to force feed video on somebody that's not into video. We don't want to force feed text on somebody that's not into text. There's a mix of both out there. And I think as authors, we need to be versed in all forms, in audio too, as we're doing right now, certainly can make a big impact. I mean, Tim, it's just one of those things where at this point, we're all media companies. And if we're a media company, whether you're a brand of one or a brand of 1,000, if we're a media company, we think like a media company, we're saying, okay, how do they want to learn? What is their preferred style of communication? And then we meet that wherever it may be.
Okay. So what are generally the biggest mistakes that you see people make in their content marketing?
I think number one by far is they're not obsessed with the questions their prospects are asking in the way that their prospects are asking them. Because businesses like to talk like businesses, and they like to think like businesses. And they don't think like the actual customer. If you obsess over the way the customer thinks, then you have the ability to teach at a level that is superior to the majority of people that are in your space. That's number one, thinking just like the customer. I think number two is many of them come across as being very biased or salesy. And that's not what the consumer or the buyer wants. What they want is they want to feel like you get them, that you understand them, and you're so honest with them that you're willing to say, hey, this product that we sell, this service that we offer, it's not a good fit for you and you're willing to be honest and say that. Like for me as a pool guy, fiberglass pool is not a good fit for you if you're looking for something that's longer than 40 feet or wider than 16 feet or deeper than 8 feet because they have size limitations and they can't go beyond that. But that's the type of thing, Tim, we need to bring out early, and we need to come right out with those elephants in the room, if you will. Because if we just bring them to the front door and say, hey, this is our elephant, we become dramatically more trustworthy to the reader or to the viewer. And ultimately, that's what we want. I think those are probably the two biggest mistakes that we see.
Yeah, because I remember a part of your book, it says about the fact that you never include yourself in any of these sort of like 10 best people in this particular category for the very reason that it sounds a bit self-serving if you're number one on the list.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean you can't make it known that you also offer the thing or that you do the thing, right? And so it's inferred that you also offer that particular product or service. And so I wouldn't shy away from being open and saying, hey, this is us too. But at the same time, you're right. I don't put myself on a best of list. Now, I would not hesitate to reference another list. In other words, let's say a third party did some type of article that was promoting or essentially awarding something that we had done. they had ranked us in a particular way, or they'd given us some amazing review or whatever, I wouldn't hesitate for a second to mention those, because that doesn't make you sound like a schmuck. It just helps reinforce whatever that thing is that you're trying to offer.
Okay. Now, a lot of my listeners on my show are obviously just going to be sort of one-man band authors and other people, but there will be some people who've got maybe more means, or maybe they've actually got outside income and other things. Would it make sense for somebody to pay for someone to do their content marketing for them?
I would say in most cases, no. And the reason for this is, especially if anybody's listening to this podcast, they're natural teachers. This is their thing. And the one thing that we're good at is communicating through the written and oftentimes through the spoken word. So with that being the case, nobody can produce your content like you can. I mean, it's just, just like nobody can. I mean, it's just impossible to do this in a way that truly represents the soul of you. And so could you outsource it? You could, especially if you're if you start to get, become a larger company, if you're, doing a couple million a year, maybe. But otherwise, I would urge those that are listening to this to learn how to do these things in-house. And for the solopreneurs that are listening to this, the fact is, we've all got these intimidations that we're not good at. Video might intimidate us, or video editing might intimidate us, or whatever that thing is. But fact is, and this is just reality, Tim, we got to get over it. I mean, I tell myself all the time, Marcus, you just got to get over it. Whatever that thing is. It doesn't matter how I feel about something. The marketplace at this point demands it. So I need to do something to make myself look different, to set myself apart. And so that's our challenge. And that's why I suggest that we look past our supposed issues or weaknesses, and we say, okay, this is just what the marketplace now demands. And so I'm going to go with it.
I'm going to spring a surprise question on you, mainly because we're a little bit early in terms of the amount of time for the interview. But also, I think to sort of bring things together, let's say we've got a hypothetical author who's listening to the show called Bob. And Bob writes books where there's basically a cat detective. So there's a detective who's got a cat. And what kind of thing should they be doing? Let's say they're in the process of starting their new book about being a cat detective and whatever. What sort of things should they start considering doing in the first instance?
Well, not that I want to be redundant, but I'm going to be, just to hit it home, because, I mean, what they need to do is they need to show how their brain works. Where's the secret sauce made? And the secret sauce for an author is the story. Like, what does that come from? Most authors don't necessarily show or tell that very well. And so I would start the process of showing that. I would document, visually speaking, the entire process of coming up with the content. And I would just potentially crowdsource with the audience too. In other words, I would say, so, I'm debating about some names for for this cat detective. What do you think it should be? And help people get excited about your work because they're actually a part of it. Make it so that they're helping produce the story because you put it out there. And you said, okay, so what do you suggest? This is what I'm thinking. And just continue to involve the public. All you need is a few hardcore fans once that book comes out that are going to spread the word, that could make all the difference in the world between it popping in the marketplace and it really getting momentum versus just kind of fizzling out.
And I'm guessing that would probably be like video content mostly to begin with.
Yes, I think so. Definitely mostly video content in that case.
And they should also probably be reading every other cat detective book ever known to mankind and starting to think about writing comparison articles and how their book is going to be different to.
Yeah, I think once the storyline really takes shape and once you get a sense for what else is in the marketplace, and I would start producing textual content about that particular genre and some of the buyer-based questions that those hardcore readers are asking. And yeah, so I would start with that, but I probably wouldn't do that first. I would let the story start to develop and some of the foundation develop and some of the chapters potentially develop. And then once I had a better sense of the direction, then I would start to produce some of the other content.
I suppose in some ways what you're suggesting makes sense in as much as hopefully they'll start attracting some viewers to their videos who are people who are interested in their genre. And then they're a source of people to talk to in terms of finding out what the other competitor books and things are, and maybe what they're actually thinking about in terms of buyers of cat detective books, for example.
Exactly. And look, most authors aren't doing this. And so anything that you do like this, it's going to make you different. It's going to make you original. So much of content marketing for me, the reason how I got to have the most trafficked swimming pool website in the world and how so many of our clients have gone on to experience similar results is because we were willing to experiment and to test. If you're listening to this, especially if you're like a solopreneur, it means you got no red tape. You can just be as creative as you want. You don't have to ask anybody, so am I allowed to follow that rule? You can make the rules. And that's what it's all about. That's why you see industries get turned over on their heads, is when somebody comes in, they break all the rules, and the rule breakers of today are the rule makers of tomorrow. That's just how it works.
Okay. I'm going to ask you another surprise question. Have you ever considered self-publishing, and why did you go with Wiley for your book they asked you to answer?
Well, for me, in this case, I understand that I'm not the most organized guy in the world always. And so I wanted to make sure that I had a publishing house behind me, could do a good job on the distribution, could do a good job on the cover, could just, professional editing job, those things. And plus they had approached me and they wanted to work with me. That being said, I understood what I was getting myself into. I understood that they were not going to be good at marketing the book, and they're not. They leave that up to me. And I can't complain about it because I knew that was the deal. Now, not every publisher is like that. And oftentimes, publishers don't give you a lot of love until you've got a big victory under your belt. Once you do, they'll promote your stuff a lot more. But, in this case, Wiley's fine. But I thought what they could do were things that I wouldn't do a very good job at. And I think that turned out to be the case. I definitely don't think there's anything wrong with self-publishing, especially for the person that's organized, that's done it before. I would love the idea of doing that in some ways, especially for me as a speaker. If I go in as a speaker and I say, hey, as part of my fee is 100 books, let's say. Well, for the most part, that's coming off of my fee. I'm not really going to make much money at all on those 100 books. But if it was a self-published book, now all of a sudden it becomes a lot more worth it. It's like, to give you another example of what I'm talking about, one of the major bookstores in all the airports that you see in the U.S. is Hudson News, Hudson, Hudson News. And the thing about them is you can get on their shelf, which is called Hudson Recommends, for like 3 months, and it costs about $12,000 USD. So if I did that, and I know that the average book in that case is going to sell somewhere between 500 to 1,000 copies. 500 to 1,000 copies, 3 months, and you're in a whole bunch of airports around the U.S. Now, if you just sell 500 copies, let's say, and you went through a publisher, well, you've definitely lost money. You've definitely lost money unless you get some secondary promotion out of that. In my case, unless I get another speaking gig or unless I get some workshops or some client work. But if I had self-published it, it'd be easy to write that check because I know that I would probably at least break even. And so some of my friends that do self-publishing, they oftentimes will go through a venue like that because worst case scenario, they're going to break even or make a little bit of money versus somebody like myself. If I'm going to spend that $12,000 USD, I'm probably only going to make 1,000 out of it. And I'm like, do I want to gamble $11,000 to see if work comes out of it?
Yeah. Okay. So I think we've just about covered everything. Well, we haven't covered everything. We scratched the surface of it enough. How can people find out about Marcus Sheridan and your numerous business interests? Well,
hey, it's great being on your podcast, Tim, and speaking with your audience. And if anybody ever wants to contact me, you can just email me, marcus@thesaleslion.com, and you can find my website, thesaleslion.com. I'm at The Sales Lion on Twitter, and find me on Facebook. I'm public on there too. And so, all those ways, I'm out there. I'm available. If anybody has a question, hit me up, and I'll try to answer you as soon as possible.
Well, thanks very much for being on the show today, Marcus.
My pleasure, buddy.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.